Okay, over to you, Sajay.
Hello. Good evening, comrades all.
Evening.
Evening.
I'm Tajay Palmer, the former Deputy General Secretary for the PNPYO. Let me welcome everyone to this evening's session as we celebrate the PNPYO's 50th anniversary. Tonight's theme is celebrating the 97th birthday of the Honorable Michael Manley, analyzing Michael Manley's 1972 speech to the United Nations General Assembly. I now invite Comrade Paul to give the purpose of this session. Comrade Berg.
Comrades, good evening, and thank you, Sajay. Sajay is a Deputy General Secretary of the PNP Youth Organization, and we welcome him and his participation. And it's very simple. Michael Manley made a fundamental transformational impact on the Jamaican society. There are so many things we could speak about that impact, not advertising Leroy's book, but one of the best summary accounts of that impact in terms of legislation is captured in Land of My Birth. One of the things I remembered, and I think was his first legislative act, and Louis can correct me, and I'm sorry if I spent a minute on this point. Up to 1972, if you are caught with a spliff, a ganja seed, a bud,
Yes.
it was 18 months mandatory sentence. And many people were caught with ganja spliffs and buds. And the police also planted ganja spliffs and buds on many people. And these people had a criminal conviction. And when Michael changed it from mandatory to discretionary fines, a number of people, included Toots Maytal and Bonnie Whaler, were released as notable artists. They came out of prison immediately. But that Manley era, we have not done justice to it. We have not connected the dots. We want to talk about what Manley did, but we don't relate it to how it has impacted on our life today. Today, we are honored to have Louis Marston, who many of us suspected in the 70s was a plant of Michael Manley in the PNPYO, but he proved himself differently. Certainly, Real Cook felt that Louis Marston was a plant of Michael Manley in the YO. But Louis was in the trenches with us every single way. He has proven himself beyond a shadow of doubt. He was elected to the first Politburo of the YO. But outside of politics, Louis is an academic, and a different kind of academic. Not an academic, not an intellectual academic alone, but a grassroots, historical academic. In other words, giving analysis from a class, color, race perspective. In the same way that Eric Williams, when he wrote Capitalism and Slavery, explained to us the economics of slavery. And it was in the benevolence of Queen Victoria to just give us our freedom, as many of us were taught in school. So thank you very much for being here, Louis. And Sajay, I turn to you to continue with the agenda. Sajay, you have to unmute.
Thank you, Comrade Paul. We now move on to the excerpt and conceptualization by Comrade Danny Roberts. Comrade Roberts.
Yeah, good night, comrades. Okay, so first of all, let me just spend a minute or so contextualizing the 1972 speech. without trespassing too much upon Louis' presentation. This was the first speech that Michael made since his election in February of 1972. It was made in October of 1972 at the United Nations. And the speech largely dealt with the global situation, looking at three major issues: the inequalities of wealth that existed between and among nations, the terms of trade which were inequitous, and the exploitation of the natural resources which became a feature of those who produced, primary producers of wealth, and those with the technology. In setting those three themes, if you like, as part of his global presentation to the UN, he posited it against some activities that were currently taking place within the global space at the time, particularly looking at the situation in South Africa and Southern Rhodesia, the struggles in Angola, Mozambique, Guinea-Bissau, all armed struggles, but had a profound racial component and content to it. He then sought about to explain what the role of the United Nations ought to be, and in so doing, provide a kind of a framework. And what was that framework? That framework, he said, was applicable not only to the international community, but to individual countries as well. He spoke about the absence of what he calls the global frame, which should govern the relationship between and among nations. And then identified two critical components of the way in which countries should interact with each other, and even within their own countries, they should react. And those are notions, what he called, of equality and self-reliance. And so he argued that equality and self-reliance must be the critical, fundamental anchor around which nations conduct themselves and societies conduct themselves. So against that background, I'm going to start with the very first excerpts from his presentation that kind of sets the context within which he was able to deliver that speech. And I begin. I speak today for a new administration in Jamaica, which has a clear and simple philosophy about human affairs. We believe that the idea of equality is the only enduring principle by which mankind may be guided in the conduct of national and international affairs. We believe further that the survival of mankind itself depends upon the speed with which man comes to learn that there must be a universal moral foundation for the conduct of affairs, and that in the absence of a universal morality to determine relations within societies and as between nations, modern technology will eventually destroy us. Therefore, we begin with the thesis that unemployment and poverty, malnutrition, inadequate housing existing side by side with conspicuous affluence represent an intolerable invasion of the principle of equality and represent a challenge to the will of our nation, which must be faced and overcome. Equally, the international juxtaposition of wealthy nations and poor nations is an affront both to the conscience and the common sense of mankind. If we fail within Jamaica to build a society of equality and to achieve an equitable distribution of wealth among all our people, we will have failed our generation and history will exact its price. Equally, if the international community fails to build an order that is founded upon the equitable distribution of the world's wealth, generations will arise which will sweep us away. That's the first excerpt from the presentation. Back over to you, Tashi. Unmute, Tashi.
Sajay, unmute.
Thank you. Thank you, Comrade Roberts. I was looking to see if the comrade chairman is in the meeting, but I'm not seeing her. She's supposed to bring greetings tonight. So I would I would like to move for us to take the next excerpt until she joins. Is that okay? Comrade Danny Roberts, please.
Danny, you're supposed to read the next excerpt. I don't know if you heard that.
Probably by the time you finish, it will be all the excerpts that I was speaking about.
All right, so make a turn. Thadje, I think we should turn to Louis Marston now with your agreement. Louis, over to you.
Okay, good night and welcome to all. It's really quite a privilege for me to kind of make this kind of presentation. So I remember last year, I was on a radio program and we had a grand time looking at this kind of thing. My presentation is really centered on this theme, global transformation for equality, race consciousness, and self-reliance for real change in service of national development. And this is how I saw the speech. But let me say this first. My first learning about the country itself, Jamaica, happened in a limited way when I attended Manley High School in 1966. All right, so at this time, I want to recognize also the 60th anniversary of Manley High School, the first high school in St. Thomas started in 1961 under the PNP government. Good. Now, this second institution of learning was really in the PNP youth organization and the Michael Manley era. I learned much about the African past itself. I mean, many of us were haunted about the history of slavery, and I think that Michael Manley made a lot of things interesting for us and made a lot of things easy to understand. And the first time I met Michael Manley was circa 1969 at Manley High School. He came to give a speech at the JTA conference. And I was so aware that all the people working in the canteen were laborites, that I decided that I would go and serve him, his food and stuff like that, so I could meet him and talk with him and so forth. And that was really the first encounter, and it was really significant. Since then, I joined the PNPYO after leaving high school, sometime after, and I got involved in international relations, a field that I like very much. And Paul can tell you, my code name was the diplomat in the YO. So when I speak about Michael Manley and foreign policy, I'm looking at from 1969 to 1979. And I think that Michael Manley gave the signal in terms of what he wanted to say to the international community in an article. I think the article is Overcoming Insularity, that was published in the Foreign Affairs Political Journal. And in this article, Michael Manley showed himself as this person with this continental imagination from this small country. And that is really something that was really significant, you see. And you saw that kind of character in this 1972 speech. Now, I've read this speech over and over, and what I observe is what I call these philosophical qualities that you'll see, that Michael Manley is that philosophical political leader that we really have in Jamaica. And what I mean in a technical sense is this. If philosophy has to do with the identification of a problem and the development of a body of ideas to create new ideas, to create new knowledge in terms of comprehending this problem, with a view to solve the problem, then that issue is philosophical. And this is how I see Michael Manley. But I will leave the refinement of the political discussion to Professor Anthony Boggs. I hope that he will check in at some time. Now, Michael Manley saw Fidel Castro as is impact in terms of 20th century world history in the liberation of Southern Africa, and said never since Alexander the Great, from a small country as Macedonia, you know, as this leader from a small country has had impact on the world, Fidel is the next. Well, I want to put Michael Manley in that line, because never before that in terms of my understanding, that a leader from a small country made such significant impact on the world in such a short space of time. And this is how I see the 1972 speech. So what I'd like to do, I'd like to look in terms of his introduction, in terms of how we saw what's happening in Jamaica, his early critique of the UN system, is the global institutions as barriers for social, cultural, and economic development in Jamaica, and African liberation struggles with the implication in terms of the development of the Black conscious movement in Jamaica during the 1960s. And in his presentation, he said to the president of the General Assembly, "It may surprise you, Mr. President, so many great voices have spoken with eloquence and cogency about the world's problem, that I realized that it would not lie within my power to bring a new revelation to the continuing debate about the world and its crisis." Quite, you know, the sense of humility. You know, therefore, may I speak to the Assembly. First, as leader of a small country and a young nation, and secondly, in all humanity for myself as a human being, the fundamental root and source of the continuing crisis in human affairs, which directly threatens the future of mankind, underlines so many current dislocations and upheavals. Indeed, violence around the globe. We believe in the idea of equality is the only enduring principle by which mankind is guided in the conduct of international affairs. Now, international morality, and this is where the thing is coming, is offering something new now to the United Nations, which is not there, right? He believes that human survival of mankind depend on the speed in which man comes to realize and learn that there must be a universal moral foundation for the conduct of. And the absence of this universal morality within nation and between technology will destroy us. All right. Now, one of the things that he looked at is this whole concept of talking about his own country, the issue of illiteracy, the Jamal campaign that he announced. And you notice that Michael Mann was very cautious even in terms of bringing in democratic socialism, because he wanted to know that people would be educated around this kind of situation. And he spoke about that at home, we have launched a massive literacy campaign, because a just society cannot function unless doors of knowledge through reading are open to all people. We seek to mobilize all the resources in the name of equality through the method of self-reliance. So now what he argues now is this whole question of inequality and what you call the social tsunami. Good. How the existing social and economic system in Jamaica breeds inequality and the danger of the system regarding crime. The issue that we are looking on today regarding crime is something that he saw. You see, the speech is enduring, it is prophetic. And he said this: we begin with the thesis that unemployment and poverty, malnutrition, and inadequate housing existing side by side with conspicuous affluence represent an intolerable invasion of the principle of equality and represents a challenge to to the will of the nation and must be faced and overcome. And if we fail to build a society of equality and to achieve equitable distribution of wealth among the people, we will have failed our generation and history will exact its price. But equally, if the international community fails to do same in terms of equitable distribution of the world's wealth, generation will arise to wash us away. And then we need to look at since the 1980s, and especially after 1980, with the kind of new values and what we saw, developing in this world. Now, anybody that followed the United Nations discussion in 2021, more than often the presenters speak about the question of the United Nations, that when United Nations emerged, it may have been 50 or so countries, and now it's time for change. Well, Michael Manley saw this long before, right? He spoke about it. And it is very important that we look at it within this whole context of globalization and marketization. When people speak about democracy, there's no such thing about democracy in international community. Simply put, this assembly in the United Nations, simply put, this assembly has become known as a place where torrents of words that burn with urgency and truth fall upon deaf ears, that are often closed by the narrowest self-consideration of national interest. I suggest rather that the inadequacies of the UN precisely reflect the misplaced priorities of its member nations, especially the most powerful and the wealthy ones amongst them. And he was extremely critical in terms of this whole question of colonialism and technology from 1972. One of the most dangerous of man's gift is his ability to mask the new pursuit of self-interest to the four corners of the world, created a world no longer merely content to hope for social justice, but has come to demand it as a right. And what we look at here is, in fact, in really a serious way, when you look at marketization, when you look at things like the transactional society, when you look at the whole question of the values of raw individualism and individual pursuit that really came on in 1980s, then we can begin to understand some of these things. When Thatcher and Bush met at Aspen, Colorado, and they were discussing the New World Order, they're saying that, look here, let us not listen to those people like the man from Jamaica talking about new international economic order and new the non-aligned movement and all of this kind of thing. They were critical of that kind of thing and wanted to reinstitute a system that deepened the kind of unequal relationship that Manley was critical about in the 1970s. And one of the issues in terms of the global institution that he spoke about is this whole question of loan. Equally, I wish to draw attention to the rules that govern the availability of soft loans to the international monetary agencies. I propose then that can work out additional criteria under which developing countries may qualify for low interest loan. And I make two proposals to that end. Firstly, that high rates of unemployment in a country should be accepted as a measure for eligibility whenever that exceeds some predetermined level. Secondly, that certain social priorities should be isolated for soft loan purposes, regardless of the social circumstances. The most important of these should be housing. And if that did not materialize in terms of getting loan from the international agency to do that, Michael Manley then went on and developed the National Housing Trust. That has been one of the most transformative institutions in this country since 1944. So it's all question of individual, not individual morality, but international morality that is advancing now. Is the question of how terrible inequalities of wealth between nations in the course of history. It's massively documented. Everybody knows perfectly well what needs to be done to reverse the process by which rich nation gets richer while poor nation gets poorer. We know the heart of our economic problem is to be found in one, terms of trade, two, terms of price and price of money, and the basis on which the proceeds that arise from the exploitation of natural resources are shared between countries that have those resources and those that have the knowledge and technology. This is where the International Bauxite Association came in, this whole new international economic order. And one of the things about Michael Manley that I think that really contributed to his global outlook is his experience in the trade union movement, that when he started to look at how it really operated on that international scene. The final section now is dealing with African liberation struggles and the implication for Black consciousness. Now, I will tell you this, 1972 was like a second emancipation in Jamaica. But when Michael Manley returned from the Algiers summit in 1973, and I wish that Leroy, later could look at his section of his book that he spoke about, that the JMA, the private sector, and all of this kind of thing. One of the stuff that they started to say now, that you go to Africa to try to help Black liberation and need to pay attention to whom, as if the Black liberation struggle in Africa is the foreign to what is taking place at home. Because very important, what we're talking about now was for the first time in the history of Jamaica that the Black conscious movement itself was embraced and was articulated by a political leader. But we must understand this. It was the unity of the Black people in Jamaica across this country. The socialist historians and theorists of the 1930s may have not done us well in terms of how they look at history. For example, I make the charge that it was united Black people that defeated colonialism. But it was 1944 and party politics that divided the Jamaican people and destroyed that unity of political force. Since then, we have not achieved any significant political achievement. We can't even come together and say how we can develop a republic in this country. Nor everybody running around that we need to follow Barbados and this kind of thing and so forth, that I really, really totally against. We will have to find a way. I recall reading a letter from Richard Hart to W. Domingo, who was a part of the PNP early group and stuff like that. And Richard Hart said to him, and this is in a book named The Arise Traveling by Ken Post, one of the most comprehensive book on the 1930s. Right? And he said to W. Domingo, Domingo, make sure you keep this race business under control. We are not going to bring it into the fore. And this was the PNP, because the socialists never see, the socialist thinking people, this kind of situation. You hear they talk about class struggles in the 1930s. Which class struggles? It was laborers, barefooted people who went out there united. And I may just interject. Leonard P. Hoyle and the early Rastafarian movement made a significant contribution to the anti-colonial struggle and to unite the Black people across the plantations. And in 1972, we saw that kind of signal. And Michael Manley, for example, many of these elite people in Jamaica were arguing that here comes a man, Michael Manley, want the gardener and the helper to eat on the same table with us. And it was not so much socialism. Any political leader in this country that raised the issue of race becomes a target for destruction. Good? Anyone. They're targeted in terms of looking at it from, we call color for color. Color for color. This was the Paul Bogle kind of situation. You look at that in the 1890s. A man running for politics and in Black business and said, no, him is Paul Bogle, we must destroy him. And one of the things with Michael Manley and those who fought against them has to do with this history of race. Now, where we reach in the world today, to conclude my presentation now. We are at a time in the world in which I describe it as the clashing of civilization and the remaking of a world order. We're at a time when we see Western civilization is on the decline and other civilizational poles are rising up. it is a lot of contention in terms of how the African civilization, given the complexity of the continent, how it will raise up. But we know that the diasporic Africans need to take a leading role in terms of what we can do now. The politics of this time is one of race, one of culture, and race in politics is very important, and it's something that we have been really hiding in this country. And we give thanks to Michael Manley when he came and he related that. So what he said today, what he said at that time there, and he was speaking about this international morality at the time, 1972, some Olympics, that Jamaica began an initiative that kept Southern Rhodesia out of the Olympics. And that was something that was really significant. And he was uncompromising regarding the struggles, the African liberation struggles. And I finally end with this question: why did Nelson Mandela visit Jamaica as a second country? Not because it is close to Cuba. He said he wanted to come to Jamaica to see this little man named Michael Manley, who has been struggling on his behalf around the world. And that is something that is significant. Michael Manley was indeed a philosopher and one of those giants from a small country that I would rank with the Fidel Castro and the Alexander the Great from Macedonia. Thank you. Yeah, I'm finished.
Sajay, let me unmute you. Over to you, Sajay. But just before you start, let me just offer an apology for the chairman of the party, Angela Brownberg. She's actually in another virtual meeting, which she can't get out of at this time. She's trying to find a few minutes, but she's actually in another virtual meeting. Over to you, Sajay.
Okay, thank you, Comrade Louis Moiston. Let me also pause to acknowledge the presence of the most Honorable Mrs. Patricia Manley, the widow of the most Honorable Michael Manley, who has joined us this evening.
We're speaking of Beverly Manley.
No, there's Patricia Glynn Manley online.
I didn't see.
Yes.
We need to welcome her. I'm sorry I didn't see.
Yes, welcome, come. So moving right along to.
Thank you for being so alert, Comrade Sajay. Thank you.
Yes, yes. Come. Moving on to our open discussion.
No, we're going to do that now. Sajay, I think we are just going to run to Danny for his quote that he should have done just before.
Oh, he's back?
Yeah, he's back. He had a problem to unmute.
No, I was muted. All right. Oh. So I think Louis set the context now for the second excerpt that I'd like to read. And we can substitute globalization for colonialism.
Oh, yeah.
Come to that part.
Fantastic, yes.
It says that, Mr. President, may I remind this assembly of the two critical elements in our present dilemma. On the one hand, colonialism and technology have combined to create an intolerable and self-perpetuating disproportion between the wealth of nations. On the other hand, one of the most dangerous of man's gift is his ability to mask the raw pursuit of self-interest behind the rhetoric of good intentions. But technology has spread the rhetoric to the four corners of the globe and created a world that is no longer merely content to hope for social justice, but has come to demand it as a matter of right. That's it, Ajay.
Ajay, wake up, man.
Unmute.
Ajay.
Work after work with them, you try no bird.
No. He's unmuted.
All right, thank you, Commissioner. So moving right along to our open discussion, Comrade Paul Burke, I'm told that you're supposed to lead us in that section. Please go ahead.
Okay.
Sir
So
Paul,
I
I
did,
was just hoping if Leroy, if I could really just
and as about to ask
okay.
Leroy to add some words. Thank you, Louis. But I have to add my own welcome to the most honorable Mrs. Glenn Manley and thank her for being here. We were briefed what was happening with the Manley Foundations, the merging of the Norman Manley, the Edna Manley, and the Michael Manley. And we have offered whatever role we can play to support it. The 1970s fraternity. We want to be supportive. But not Ruel, Louis, you are correct. Leroy's work is really something that, and I'm not advertising for Leroy coming out and get my money off the sales, but Leroy work and how he captures that period and so the relevance that he has is useful for this discussion. So I want to ask Leroy to contribute and then we move on. Leroy. Yeah, you can unmute. You can unmute. We have
Yeah.
asked you to unmute.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, yes, Louis, thank you for that. The quotation you asked me to, the section you asked me to share with the audience,
Yeah, yeah.
it's probably less than a page. It runs from page 273 over to 274. Goes as follows. As Michael Manley had stated, history is a story of action and reaction. And before the forces of change could effectively organize their offensive against the apparatus of privilege, the empire had started to strike back. In fact, the PNP government's honeymoon with big business lasted barely 6 months. By August 1972, Winston Meeks, president of the Chamber of Commerce, began to criticize the government for extending its tentacles into the domain of businessmen. This was in response to the government's efforts to keep down the price of saltfish by buying in bulk. Saltfish was at that time the cheapest source of protein for most Jamaicans. By June 1973, the Jamaica Manufacturers Association, through its president, Charles Henderson Davis, had joined in. This was in response to the government's efforts to control construction costs by acquiring 10% of the shares of the Caribbean Cement Company. Henderson Davis called this a flagrant breach of the democratic principles of the free enterprise system, which the government professes to believe in and support. It was unmistakably clear that the defection of the capitalists was well underway when Douglas Vaz, Henderson Davis's successor as head of the JMA, launched a verbal attack on Prime Minister Michael Manley's speech at the Non-Aligned Conference in Algiers in September 1973. Manley had accepted Fidel Castro's offer to travel with him to the meeting in the Cuban president's plane. And at the conference, Manley had offered to send Jamaican volunteers to support the freedom fighters in Southern Africa. Not only did Vaz attack Manley on the offer of volunteers, a subject not affecting Jamaican businessmen, but went on to issue a thinly veiled threat that the government had better turn its attention to domestic developments in order to stop the outflow of people and capital. The most significant aspect of the attack is that Vaz had been a PNP supporter in the 1972 elections. And just to round it off, in Michael Manley's view, the four issues driving the opposition of big business and the upper class between 1972 and 1974 were the National Youth Service, the property tax, foreign policy, and government's interventionist role in the economy. The centrality of the youth service after it was announced as being compulsory is attested to from within the ranks of the businessmen. According to Stevens and Stevens, one of these businessmen told them, "This frightened a lot of people. You just couldn't have rural youths, ghetto kids, and criminal elements associate with kids from other families." End of citation.
Thank you very much, Leroy. And Thaji, we're going to move by raising of hands. I'm just going to claim a co-chair privilege that I covered that GMA conference for RJR as a reporter at RJR at that time. Michael was a guest speaker, right? But the main concern of the GMA was the Prices Commission and prices, right? Because we had started to put up control what people could sell things at, what you call basic foods, flour and sugar and saltfish and bread and those things. But we're going back to the 72 speech, right? I really have to thank Louis again. And now we're going to open for comments, questions, but not speeches.
Albert, sorry, did you recall that IMF demonstration that we carried out against the
January of 70.
Yeah, I think that was really kind of significant because one of the things that happened is that we as a youth organization, and I want the young people to listen to this, because I'm not playing around with young people and this kind of thing because, them need to understand certain things. We were
I think that needs to be a separate topic in itself.
All right, the youth.
Why and what?
Yeah, but what we found out was that a South African was on a delegation, IMF delegation to Jamaica. And we had a demonstration, and we got rid of that South African in the same day that we discovered and exposed to the public. And I think that was something that was significant because Norman Manley from in the mid-1950s, took this lead in terms of no trade with South Africa. Our South Africans could travel to our country. So that's a significant point in terms of our activities there.
It was all part of the consciousness, I agree. What would not have come out in Michael Manley's 72 speech, and Louis has not brought out, and maybe people don't want to know, some people felt that Jamaica was boiling, and it's Michael's 72 victory that gave hope, and that militancy was channeled into political work. But I can tell you, had Shearer and JP won in February 72, there would have been violence, bloodshed, who knows what in Jamaica at that time. But I want to just put the context and open the floor, Louis, because you're going to have some closing remarks to do on questions. So can you raise hands, please?
There's an hand raised, Bert.
I don't see any hands.
Yeah, David had put up his hand.
Oh, I'm sorry, David. Yeah, you can unmute yourself, David.
Just want to participate in the sense that I was a young man at the time. It was very powerful what was happening. I have to back up Paul in saying that if something hadn't changed radically, this country would have burst out, put it simply. Because at that time, we were going down the conservative approach of managing a country, which is in the Jamaican context, we used to put it as trickle-down economy. In other words, you only feel the effect 10 years after it has taken place. And at that time, we had all these plazas going up in Kingston. All of that whole stretch there was around that time going up, and all these whispers as to who the power brokers and owners were of that, a lot of which were later, or at that time, the JLP major ministers in the party. And so there was a strong undercurrent of disenchantment and ready to take up, I wouldn't say arms. In Jamaica, we take up machete and knife. So in that context, it was good to get that change. But to me, was even then, was always the one who was controversial in my sayings. Sorry, Paul.
You're breaking up,
My
David.
father's greatest impact on the country was on the social seat of tearing down the hierarchy. You remove that whole hierarchical approach of how you run your society, broke it down, tore it down, that you became equal in where you can go and what you can participate in, right down to going to the hotel and demanding that the waiter don't put you last while they serve the overseas guests first. Let me put it that way. Because I've had those kind of racial side of things happen to me myself when I was at that time a young engineer, highly paid, and therefore can afford to go to these places, a lot of which were subsidized by the company, which at that time was Alcoa, Aluminum Company of America Limited, which later became Jamalco, which became CAP, which became all kind of things. And so I could afford to go to those places, and I was relatively young, not yet 25. So I think that was correct in saying relatively young. And that was the biggest change in tearing down that structure and flattening it, that it became available to everybody that they could go.
All right, thanks.
On behalf of my wife, who was also at that time along with me, my wife, the other thing that he changed drastically was the bastardization stigma around bastardization, whereas 2/3 or more of Jamaica, if not 75%, are born out of wedlock. You're not born within the church, you're not born within the European structure, you're not born between where they're preaching against you and say, oh, you are a sinner. No, you come from African heritage, where that is the norm in the African heritage. You are born out of wedlock. You don't criminalize me almost because of something that you had no control over. You had no control over how you came into this world. And yet that thing of the bastardization cut very deep. People don't talk about it until he outlawed it. And until that political song came out, which said, no bastard, no there again. Some of you might remember that, those words in that song. So those aspects of it had a profound impact on the young people at that time who were coming up and understanding and getting involved in politics and understanding that this is how you're gonna move your country forward. If you don't get involved, if you don't understand the ramifications, if you don't understand how things work, you can't change anything, you can't improve anything. So you're going along with the old structures. Mike and Manley came in and tore down the old structures, and we're trying to put the new structures.
I'm going to thank you here, David. I'm going to thank you here for that intervention, right? I don't know who else, but until I say another hand, I just want to remind people that in
Oh,
1972,
can I just go through 1 quick minute just to introduce myself because I'm not on the screen properly.
no,
I'm the
people are
brother
asking
of
you,
Ruel. Okay.
not of
You have the
Leroy,
name
of
up there?
Ruel, of Ruel Cook. This is
Yeah.
Ruel Cook's brother, not of Leroy Cook.
Okay.
All right, David. So we had spoken earlier, but I don't think we did it. And Narcissus, you are trying to raise your hand, Norris?
Yeah,
Yeah,
no.
and then say, Leroy.
Just quickly in terms of the context, a quick point that coming out of the Walter Rodney riots of the 1968, right? And the whole, I mean, the speaker spoke about the impact on the Black consciousness and how Michael embraced that and so on, you know. But if you remember the rally at Race Course, there was a lot of Rastafarians which were there because, as Lou would, know in depth, the Rastafarian movement was very repressed. So the social pressures which were building up, the social fissures, Manley not only captured it, in a sense, Manley saved the society as the speaker from the violent bubbling up evil because of the repression that was taking place. Police, they were burning books. You couldn't have Black Power books and so on and so forth and so on, and the notion of the Babylon system, right, which existed and so on. So the context in a global sense encapsulated all that, the pot boiling, bubbling up, which was taking place and so on, where Manley became, as Lois said, the visionary philosophic leader, not for just Jamaica, but for the world.
Good intervention, Norris, linking the international situation, what was happening locally. And I know many people felt that you are spending too much on international politics, but it's really Manley who brought us to a better understanding of many of those issues. Yes, the Vietnam War was still going on, right? There were the contradictions in the Jamaican society. There was all the things going on in the world when Manley came on stage and started to make a difference, gave the Caribbean a voice, gave Jamaica a voice, and then started to speak on behalf of the liberation struggles. Leroy, I see your hand.
Yes, to take advantage of Louis Moiston's reference to the IMF meeting in New Kingston,
Yes.
at the Pegasus Hotel, and the activism of the PNP-YO at the time. Just to say, there's a picture number 31 in the same book that we just quoted from. Picture 31 shows Louis Moiston and Pilot Francis display anti-apartheid placards at the demonstration.
Hold it up, Leroy. Hold it up.
Can you
No,
see?
you won't see okay. But no credit to the photographer. No credit to the photographer.
Falberg.
Yeah, it's clearly stated that where there's no credit, the photographer is Paul Burke.
Okay.
Photographer is Paul Burke. That is said, it's a default position. The photographer is Paul Burke unless stated otherwise. Louis Moiston and Pilot Francis display anti-apartheid placards at the demonstration of the IMF meeting at the Pegasus. Okay. The other comment also has to do with IMF. I mean, Louis mentioned international loans that Michael at the 72 speech at the United Nations spoke of the necessity of changing the system and making it easier for poor countries to get international loans. The truth is that the situation became more difficult for poor countries. And unfortunately, although Michael raised this question at the United Nations in New York, it was not raised within the PNP. And it would have been good if the question had been raised within the PNP as early as 1972, rather than waiting until 1977. And one of the problems, and I think perhaps going forward, we need to see how we can deal with this, is that the NEC, which is the highest body of the party between conferences, normally mostly deals with day-to-day problems. and how to dodge them and avoid them and so on, or control them. And does little to have long discussions and so on about long-term issues and problems, of which obviously one which existed before 72 and continues to exist is a question of the colonialism, neo-colonialism, which still affects poor countries through the domination of these international loan pressures.
Thank you, Leroy. We still have time for 1 or 2 comments. We're closing off in about 15 minutes. So we still can accommodate before Norris gives the closing remarks, right? And Louis might not want to make any final comments. I don't see any other hands. Are there any other hands going up? No other hands going up.
All right, Paul, can I, when we look at the 1960s, and I just like to really cite Jimmy Cliff here, when someone asked him why ska did not last for very long. He said ska was a celebratory music, that they're glad that they got this independence. But as soon as they got this independence, the poor people realized that there wasn't anything in independence for them. It was not just the poor people, it was the Black people. And this is where the music itself, and this is one of the things that we left out of the frame, is that the music itself became a vehicle, because it was that kind of vehicle that Clancy Eccles put together to capture the popular imagination of the radical situation at the time. Now, to see how you sure was wicked and the police special branch was wicked is that some of the things that are coming out of the CIA papers now is that they spoke about Walter Rodney was organizing Rastas to kill tourists in Montego Bay. And this was part of the justification in terms of getting rid of Walter Rodney. And we must understand, without Sam Brown and Millard Johnson, they were the 2 voices in terms of Black people in that 1961-62 election there. And you know, Black people just totally left out, right? The whole question of the ganja issue is something that really came in terms of how the Rastas in particular, every Friday night they tell you. I used to live up, I lived there for a while, Backbush, 98, Mountain View Avenue, stuff like that, Burke. And when I used to spend holiday, every Friday night them come and raid the Rastas them for ganja, and most likely people are getting arrested. So what the PNP came in with is an issue of justice that was neglected for centuries. Paying attention to young people since 1857. There's hardly been any attention to young people. All they do is build more prisons for them and this kind of thing. And there was a promise that Michael Manley gave to the young people in 1972. So there's more work to be done. And I would like to see us, work on some of these issues. Looking at it in terms of this man from a philosophical point of view. And it is just a pity that the tribal politics in Jamaica is so strong that a significant person like this is just really put on the periphery. Michael Manley, I'm talking about, yes.
Paul, with your permission, I'd like to read one more quote.
Yeah, man, as I wanted to ask Sajay to, so Sajay, over to you. And then for Danny's final post. Sajay.
Yes, thank you, comrades. I must say it has been a very informative discussion. I myself got a few takes from it. Moving right along to our closing remarks.
No, Danny, just before that, Danny has a final excerpt to read.
A final excerpt. Okay, go ahead.
All right, thanks so much. All right, Manley again. I am proud to declare our unswerving support for the freedom fighters of Africa in their struggle for independence. I'm equally proud that it was Jamaica, under the leadership of my late father, that was the first country in the world to forbid trade with South Africa, and believe that Small as we are, we pointed a moral direction for mankind to follow. Today, I reconfirm Jamaica's support of the various resolutions that call for economic sanctions against Portugal. I'm concerned to note that once again, there's evidence of international double talk in respect of trade with Portugal. Among other things, I discovered that in spite of Jamaica's support of Assembly resolutions calling for sanctions, we're actually conducting trade with that country. And I'm announcing here and now that the government of Jamaica will be taking steps to bring all trade with Portugal to a halt until our African colonies have won their freedom.
Thank you, Danny. Sajay, over to you, Sajay.
Okay, thank you, Comrade Danny Roberts. Moving right along, we have Comrade Norris MacDonald, who will give us the vote of thanks and closing remarks. Comrade MacDonald.
Yeah, thank you very much, Comrade. This was truly a very remarkable event, very remarkable and significant in that political discussions, serious discussions have been taken out of the Jamaican body politics. Leaders such as Michael Manley has not really been talked about, and his contribution to the Jamaican affirmation of national identity and also towards the world political process. And the speakers here tonight made some very important presentations regarding this. Comrade Danny Roberts, he set the tone by explaining the context of the 1972 speech, in which Michael discussed the issue of the national liberation struggle, the South African national liberation struggle, striving to get the United Nations to focus on the issue of equality, changing the nature of how the economic system operates to create more justice for people, with the idea of a universal morality, and the issue of wealth versus poverty, which is the hallmark of the tentacles of imperialism, or imperialism operates in keeping poor people down, in gobbling up your resources and trying to suppress you if you ask for more or ask for some justice. So Danny set the tone, and also quite quickly, the issue of the relation between Jamaica, Cuba, that synergy between Michael and Fidel, which was very fundamental in terms of the struggle in Southern Africa. And even the pressure from American imperialism when Kissinger later on came and tried to bully Jamaica and so on, came out of that affirmative relationship and struggle between two third world leaders who were fighting for truth, rights, and justice in the world, especially for our Southern African brothers. Now, Louis Moiston made a very, very valuable presentation, right? And he placed it in the context of the clash of culture, the clash of civilization, and the importance of race in this context. Because historically, Black people are the most downtrodden, have been downtrodden. Other races, other religions, if they speak about their issues, it is accepted. But it's like Black people and the issue of Black rights, Black justice must not be talked about. And this is the point Louis made about in the diaspora. We in the diaspora, our voices must be loud in affirmation. We must continue the Pan-Africanist movement struggle to link and get Black poor people, the Black middle class, mobilized in that sense. So, and here we go quickly, Leroy. Touch on a point of the empire striking back. the wickedness of the system. It's like, Charles Dickens when they say, please, sir, can I have some more? How can you ask for some more? How can you ask for some more? Take what you have, take what you get, even if you're not getting anything, And so for those who think or may think that the imperialist struggle, anti-imperialist struggle is dead, they mustn't talk about it. Look at a quick fact. China took 50 years to lift 800 million people out of poverty. 800 million people, which the United Nations call one of the greatest feat in our modern history. And even today, you have billionaires who pay no taxes in America, major corporations who pay no taxes and so on. And it is the poor and the middle class in the world, the small business people in Jamaica. Businessmen are still struggling to get raw material, to get access to capital. So the debasement of currency, which imperialism does, making money don't mean anything, is a perpetual struggle. So this event, this celebration of the work of Michael Manley, is a profound thing. It must continue, and the documents are the thing must be spread, and the young people, just like we did in the 1970s when we met Michael and so on, young people must become more affirmative, more alert, and they must take up this struggle and keep it going. The torch must be kept alive. The struggle continues against imperialism and injustice.
Thank you, Norris. Thank you very much. And we are also indicted that we can't only remember Michael Manley on his birthday. We have to do far more and we have spoken about this in the PNP-YO fraternity group, how we connect the dots of the 1972 PNP administration led by Michael Manley. So it's not just to say that we did this. You have to show people how it is impacting on their lives today. It is the most transformative period of our history. And we know what happened in 1980. Most of us were there in the trenches in 1980. Those of us who are fortunate to be alive, many of us are here today. So this can't be an annual exercise. One of the things about this virtual world, I don't really like it, I love my face-to-face meeting, I love the body language, I love the passion, I love the shouting, I love the subtle vocal remarks, I love all of that. But what it has done is allow us to come together in webinars, in seminars, in virtual meetings, and to review and discuss. Out of all discussions, there must be an action plan, even if it is one task. And the planning committee must meet sometime, Louis, Norris, Leroy, those of us who are in it, and decide what are the tasks coming out of all of these sessions. An achievable, recognizable task. So I made a comment, but I won't go into today. What if Michael Manley had not won in 1972, right? That he actually saved the ruling class of this country, who ended up turning against him for the most part. He actually saved their skins, right? So I want to thank everybody who showed up, everybody who's participating. We are in the process of editing all of these and making some short videos, right? 5-minute videos that can be circulated. We have it running on our YouTube channel, and we intend to start promoting it. So to everybody, thanks for joining us. It is also, today is also Portia Simpson Miller birthday. I've seen the post all over. That was another historic occasion. 14th of December is her birth date, and we also need to recognize it. So thanks everybody. Thanks for joining us. And I see we're able to make our 1.5 hour time limit, and we have done well. 7:23. Have a good night, everybody. And
Thank you.
And
Thanks.
I just
Thanks for hosting this call.
Sefton.
Yeah, and I don't think we introduced Norris properly. And we assume that people know who Leroy Cook were, or Danny Roberts, who were some of the past. So very quickly, Danny is, well, YO days, became the acting chairman of the PNP-YO. Trade unionist, rose to the highest levels in the National Workers Union, and now is at the Hugh Lawson Center. Well, we need to get the introductions properly in future. Leroy Cook was a person first charged in organizing the YO, right? Norris MacDonald is a former, I think that his bigger position was chairman of Western Belt, but he's also a former general secretary of the PNP-YO. Can't name everybody, but we have a former chairman of the PNP-YO in the name of Sefton Johnson here, and we have Dawn Linda, who was assistant secretary at that time, really playing the role of deputy general secretary, but called assistant secretary of the YO. And I'm looking for other leaders. I say Anja Francis, who was an executive member of the PNP-YO during that period. I see Selvin Dick Walcott, who was chairman of the Manchester PNP-YO. I see James Walsh, who was chairman of the St. Anne PNP-YO. I see Gerald Mitchell, just rediscovering him, who was secretary of the St. James PNP-YO. And if I've let anybody out, forgive me. But glad to see the YO leadership, friends, members here today. Thank you very much. We are signing off.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night. Thanks.
Night.
It was great. It
All the
was
best.
great us meeting like this.
Thank you, Tajay.
Yeah, thank you. Hi.
Good night, everyone.
Good
Good night, Sharon.
By the
Good
way,
night. Good night.
anybody,
Good night,
anybody,
Paul.
Yo, what's
Good night, Louis, Leroy,
Hey,
David.
hey, Louis,
Who link
what's
to
up?
Sefton, man?
Huh? Oh, Sharon, I like
Sefton,
the
not who
book.
link to, man.
Huh?
I
You
love
talk
the
off
book.
here, man.
Yeah. Thanks.
Wow.
Thanks for the historical journey from everyone.
Yes.
Yeah, hi, bye. Yeah, well.
Okay.
I know,
before you sign off,
what you want to
before you sign off, if there's anybody,
because them out.
What is Paul Burke saying?
before I sign off, I'm going to put a number up. If there's anybody who is a former YO member or know of any, please link us to this number. I'm about to put it in the chat group, and I'll leave it there for you.
Paul,
Yes?
you know what? I forgot to do the application. Is it still online?
The application is online.
I totally
I didn't
forgot.
do it either.
Is it still online, Paul?
Yes, it is. I'm going to send it back out again. I'm just
Yeah,
looking for
because
the-
I didn't
Because I
do it.
totally forgot.
I forgot about it. So can you send it back out?
Yeah, we're going to put it back on the group. Alisa, please remind me.
Okay.
But let me put up the number for anybody who needs to contact us. Give me a second to look it up. I need to know it by heart, you know.
You're getting old. Hi, James.
Yo,
Bye,
James,
Andre.
what's up?
And no, thanks for always defending me against that Paul Burke.
Yeah, Paul's age obsession, eh?
Yeah. What's that?
Hmm.
Okay.
All right. So that's the number 816-1937. For anybody
That
who,
don't look like a bona fide number.
it is 876-816-1937. If you are
Okay, got it.
former YO member,
That's
and
the
we
year
don't
of your
have-
birth.
and we don't have your
1937.
contacts, send your emails, send your WhatsApp number to that number for me, please.
Okay,
Okay.
Paul.
All right, bye.
1937, Paul. That's the year of your birth.
about them.
Angela, when you did that talk, you not talk to your
Well, what you're no, if you say that
well,
1937 was the
friend
year of
go.
his birth,
Angela, let me stop the YouTube channel because some of the things that you people are saying